Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to explore the life of Origen of Alexandria. He is a pivotal, brilliantly smart, and honestly deeply polarizing figure in early Christian history. He's one of those historical figures who really forces us to rethink absolutely everything we might assume about the intellectual foundations of the early church.
Okay, so let's just dive right into this and ask, who exactly was this 3rd century intellectual powerhouse? Born back in 81-85, Origen was actually known to the people of his time as Adamantius. Translated, that means the man of steel. He is remembered today as one of the earliest and, frankly, most important Christian scholars in all of history. And he was driven by 2 incredibly intense traits: a completely prodigious dedication to scholarship and an absolutely fanatical commitment to personal purity.
To truly wrap your head around the sheer, overwhelming scale of his output, you just have to consider this sarcastic quip from the later scholar Jerome, who lived from AD 354 to 420. Jerome jokingly asked, "Has anyone read everything Origen wrote?" It's funny, but it brilliantly illustrates Origen's legendary, almost unbelievable productivity. I mean, he didn't just dabble in theology. He's credited with producing hundreds of comprehensive works covering theology, insanely complex textual criticism, and deep biblical interpretation. To ground us in his dramatic and really turbulent life, we have to look at AD 202. This is when his trajectory was truly forged in tragedy. When Origen was just a teenager, his father was beheaded for his Christian faith. So suddenly thrust into a position where he literally had to support his family, a teenaged Origen began teaching grammar and basic Christian beliefs. And his career in education? Well, it just exploded from there. Before long, he was running an entire school and even hosting visits from top politicians and academics.
Section 1. The Unstoppable Young Scholar.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the number 7. This represents the team of 7 scribes that Origen reportedly kept working at absolute top speed. Just picture this. He was dictating his thoughts so constantly and so rapidly that he actually needed a team of secretaries working in shifts just to keep up with his mind.
And that relentless driving pace produced a staggering volume of work, 6,500. That is the estimated page count for the original manuscript of just one of his major projects, his famous Hexapla. It was this massive undertaking of comparative literature that completely dwarfed pretty much all other works of the era. So, the crucial point here is the pure grit it took to achieve this. The number 28 represents the amount of his life, more than 28 years, that he dedicated to completing just that one single scholarly endeavor. He wasn't just, writing down opinions. He was systematically assembling the most complex religious scholarship the world had ever seen at that time. Section 2. A monumental intellectual legacy.
So what exactly did all this unparalleled time and effort actually produce for early theology? Well, first, we have his masterwork De Principiis, or On First Principles. This is widely believed to be Christianity's very first comprehensive work of systematic theology. You see, Origen deliberately studied under non-Christian philosophers in his birth city of Alexandria, Egypt, specifically so he could understand their arguments inside and out. He then took that knowledge and created a structured, systematic approach to Christian belief, essentially translating his faith through the lens of contemporary Greek philosophy.
And this brings us to the format of his Hexapla, or the Sixfold, which we mentioned a minute ago. This book is one of the earliest examples of textual criticism and scholarly apologetics, structured as a true interlinear Bible. Think of it like a giant spreadsheet. It featured one column of the original Hebrew text, running directly parallel alongside 5 columns of various Greek translations. His specific purpose in compiling this colossal reference tool was to vigorously counter Gnostic and Jewish attacks on early Christianity, all while giving Christians a comprehensive, unshakable guide to the Old Testament.
He also took on his intellectual critics directly. A Greek philosopher named Celsus had written this broad, scathing attack on the history, philosophy, prophecies, and social duties of Christianity. In response, Origen produced Contra Celsum, or Against Celsus. Instead of just ignoring the criticism, Origen produced a powerfully intellectual defense, answering Celsus point by point. He masterfully wove together evidence, logic, and philosophy to defend the Christian faith.
To navigate all these really complex texts, Origen was a highly vocal critic of the idea that only specially ordained men had the authority to interpret Scripture. He deliberately promoted deep knowledge over mere church authority. He thought that all Scripture had 3 distinct levels of meaning: literal, figurative, and moral. In fact, he's a prime example of an early church scholar who happily accepted non-literal interpretations of certain passages, like the creation account in Genesis, always pushing for a much deeper, multi-layered understanding of the text.
Section 3. Extremes, Asceticism, and Controversy.
But here's the thing. The exact same unyielding willpower that drove his brilliant scholarship also pushed him into severe and sometimes shocking physical and theological extremes. His infamous quest for purity manifested as a life of extreme asceticism. Origen completely stripped away earthly comforts. He lived without shoes or a bed. He routinely chose to work instead of sleeping. He fasted twice a week, totally avoided all meat and wine, and according to the Roman historian Eusebius, Origen took an extremely literal interpretation of Matthew 19:12 and allegedly practiced self-castration. Now, even among his most devoted admirers, this was seen as an incredibly extreme and unnecessary step, though later scholars still debate whether he actually went through with it or not. We also have to objectively look at his highly controversial theological views, which frequently put him directly at odds with his fellow believers. For example, he believed in the pre-existence of souls, theorizing that your status in the present world was actually proportional to your commitment to God during this pre-existence. His notably negative attitude toward the material physical world wasn't actually all that different from the Gnostics he so strongly opposed. He also considered the Trinity to be a ranking rather than a strict equality. And perhaps most radically, he believed in universal purification, that everyone, eventually, even demons, would be fully forgiven and purified by God.
Because of these highly unorthodox ideas, Origen's legacy became, deeply complicated. The wider church simply refused to follow the paths his brilliant mind had explored, and these claims were the key reason why he was officially declared a heretic by various church councils in the centuries following his death.
Section 4. The Unbreakable Man of Steel.
Yet, despite his deeply controversial legacy and all the intense debates over his theology, the final years of his life proved exactly why he earned his formidable nickname. Eventually, his uncompromising attitude toward Christianity and knowledge ran him directly afoul of the Roman Empire. Sometime after AD 251, a deadly plague swept right through Rome. Emperor Decius laid the blame squarely on Christians, claiming they had caused the plague by failing to worship him as a divine being. During this brutal Decian persecution, Origen was imprisoned and subjected to horrific torture. But the Romans purposefully kept him alive. Their goal was to break the famous scholar and force him to publicly recant his faith.
But true to his reputation, Adamantius remained a man of steel. He flatly refused to recant his faith, enduring the torment until he was finally released from prison when Emperor Decius died. Unfortunately, however, Origen's physical body had not weathered the torture nearly as well as his faith had. Tragically, he died from his extensive injuries very shortly after being free.
So what you should really take away from this explainer is his undeniable, world-shifting impact. Origen devoted his entire life to making evidence, reason, and scripture accessible to as many people as possible. His monumental legacy stands today as an excellent, permanent counter to any modern claim that early Christianity was shallow, merely superstitious, or somehow anti-intellectual.
Ultimately, he remains one of the most important, complex figures of the early church. Whether he is categorized today as a heretic for his speculative theology or a saint for his unbreakable devotion, we have to ask ourselves this final question. How drastically different and perhaps how much weaker would the foundation of early Christian scholarship be today without the unbreakable man of steel?